Hello? Okay. Uh, the baby's sleeping, so I gotta do another ASMR. We're watching why India's farm system is failing by Vice News. Forehead cam. Put this bad boy in 1080p. It's a little loud. God damn. That's the loudest fuck.
It's been called the largest protest in human history. For more than a year, hundreds of thousands of farmers choked off 3 highways leading into New Delhi. They faced several.
I've actually never read or seen anything about the farming system crisis in India. I'm assuming it'd be pretty massive since they'd have to feed so many people, and I know that India has a massive population of, I wouldn't say homeless, but poverty stricken people. Way worse than most first world countries. I'll definitely say India is a first world country.
Violent crackdowns. More than 700 people died during the demonstrations. This attack was carried out by a politician's son. Farmers were willing to stake their lives because they feared corporations would have taken over their farms if the government did.
What the actual fuck did we just see? Jesus Christ, bro. Could you imagine if they did that shit here? How have they not gotten like guerrilla warfare style? The fact that they're getting ran over in the street, like no one's just gonna grab a fucking gun.
Did away with a guaranteed minimum price subsidy on certain crops. Then, in November, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced that he'd take back the laws. It was a huge victory for the farmers. While their win was a blow to corporate interests, the subsidies they fought to keep prop up a way of farming that's destroying their finances, their health, and their land. This is Sukhpura, a village in Punjab state, which is known as India's breadbasket. Almost everyone here had been to the protests last year, including Jasveer Singh.
ਸਰ ਇਹ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੱਡ ਵਡੇਰੇ ਹਮਾਰੇ ਦਾਦਾ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਇਹ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਜ਼ਮੀਨ
Farmers here are mainly in the business of harvesting wheat and rice, the only 2 crops subsidized by the government's price floor guarantee.
ਪਰ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਡੈਡੀ ਕਰੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ ਉਵੇਂ ਉਵੇਂ ਥੋੜਾ ਬਹੁਤਾ ਕਰਨ ਲੱਗ ਗਏ ਜੀ ਡੈਡੀ ਦੀ ਡੈਥ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਜੀ ਫਿਰ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਸਾਰਾ ਘਰ ਦਾ ਖਰਚਾ ਮੇਰੇ ਸਿਰ ਤੇ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਜੀ ਸਾਰਾ
Singh's father committed suicide 8 years ago after finding himself almost $48,000 in debt, and he's not alone. Financial stress drives about 10,000 Indians in agriculture to take their own lives each year. His family had to sell off all but their last acre of land to pay off what his father owed, but that's still not.
It's crazy that we charge so much to people that ensure our people are fed. Like in this case, Indian people are charging their farmers so much that these guys can't pay the loans that they owe, and they end up killing themselves because people know that another farmer can just buy out their land or whatever the case is, more successful farmer, but then at some point that person's also gonna go in hard times. The same thing's gonna fucking happen again. It's just mind blowing that we care so little about people that are literally feeding us, you know? These guys are feeding people, and we're more concerned whether they can pay their money or not, instead of all the people that they're fucking feeding.
Not enough.
ਡੀਜ਼ਲ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਮਹਿੰਗਾ, ਮਸ਼ੀਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਰੇਟ ਵੱਧ ਗਈ, ਬਾਕੀ ਬੀਜ ਬਹੁਤ ਮਹਿੰਗਾ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਟਰੈਕਟਰ ਦੀ ਵਹਾਈ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਮਹਿੰਗੀ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਜੀ।
The generational debt began after the government incentivized farmers like his dad to give up traditional crops for wheat and rice.
ਜੋ ਦਾਦਾ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਗੰਨਾ ਗੁੰਨਾ ਲਾਉਂਦੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਜੀ, ਮੂੰਗੀ ਮਾਂਗੀ, ਉਹ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਹਰੀ ਕ੍ਰਾਂਤੀ ਆ ਗਈ ਜੀ, ਚੌਲ ਤੇ ਕਣਕ ਦਾ ਨਿਰਭਰ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਜੀ।
The Green Revolution started in the 1960s, when parts of the country were crippled by famine.
The immensity of India's food problem is baffling and frustrating.
Punjabis were always farmers, but they took on the burden of feeding India by switching to wheat and rice strains developed by American scientists.
Many new types of hybrid seed have been developed, and the farmer remains unaware of their potential.
Even though Punjab is just 1.5% of the nation's land area, the state supplied up to 70% of the country's wheat and 40% of its rice for decades after making the switch to monocultures. Those are crops designed to be grown one at a time in order to boost yields, but they require chemical fertilizers, toxic pesticides, heavy machinery, and use up lots of water.
So like I watched this other video on farming and how monoculture is like terrible for the land because it destroys it and doesn't replenish any of the nutrients in the soil. So when you do a monoculture, let's say you're just doing, like they're doing wheat, you're only doing wheat. To grow the wheat fast enough and consistently enough, you need to use fertilizers. And to use fertilizers, we just recently figured out how to make fertilizers, right? And fertilizers aren't infinite. Like, we're gonna run out of fertilizers, but at the moment, with what we're doing to like using fertilizers and having the whole world rely on fertilizer, because there's so many people now, and we think the output of food is gonna keep up, but the amount of fertilizers is not. Like eventually, fertilizer is going to go away and the soil is going to be so dead, because what old farmers did back in the day is that they had seasons. They did seasons of this is what grows here, there's another season that this is what grows there, and when you pick up a crop and the outcrop you leave it there, the different types of crops that you put in there. Let's say like one season you're doing wheat, another season you're doing a bunch of squash. The leftovers from squash replenish the soil, because it's not as like, this is just an example, but it's not as hard on the soil as wheat is. So it gives it time to replenish, and it gives it extra nutrients from the surrounding sources, from rain, from dung, from just everywhere. But the fact that we overuse the soil leads to the topsoil getting too eroded and then being lifted up easily by the wind, and that's one of the major reasons that we had the Dust Bowl back in wherever the fuck in the United States, and that's probably what's gonna happen to India pretty soon. Crazy enough, right?
This particular model of industrial agriculture,
This is also exactly what happened in Africa.
the only value it has is quantity. It's giving you a lot more, but it's also giving you a lot more because you're putting a lot more into the system.
Dr. Richa Kumar is an agricultural policy expert. She says these practices were unsustainable for family farmers.
We know Punjab farmers have the highest debt rate in the country. They basically got locked on to what is known as the technological treadmill of monoculture farming.
At first, farmers were given monoculture seeds funded by the Rockefeller and Ford Foundations and the US government. They continued to buy those varieties because they were the only crops their government would subsidize. Cultivating the same monocultures year after year depletes the soil and makes pests more resistant. So farmers must
The pests get used to exactly what they're using. So it's like a microscopic Darwinism is happening in the soil. The pests get so used to the fertilizer and the pest control that they're using that they become resistant, and they not only destroy crops but they also destroy the soil. It's just, but if you use a different crop, the germs from those also combat the other germs, the other bacteria, or they could also help them, but you let, that figure it out.
Must continue to buy more toxic pesticides, more fertilizers, and newly engineered seeds that can tolerate those extra chemicals. So farmers are constantly taking out loans larger than the last.
Growing monoculture rice and wheat is hugely costly. That model can only work until and unless there is some kind of price guarantee support for farmers. And what you're seeing in the farm protests is this realization of farmers that you remove that and we are going to collapse.
Farmers like Singh get that subsidized rate at a government-authorized auction yard.
ਇੱਥੇ ਲਿਆ ਕੇ ਸਫਾਈ ਕਰਕੇ ਇਹ ਗੱਟੂਆਂ 'ਚ ਪਾਈ ਜਾਊ, ਗੱਟੂਆਂ 'ਚ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਇਹ ਅੱਗੇ ਵੱਡੀਆਂ ਮੰਡੀਆਂ 'ਚ ਭੇਜੀ ਜਾਊਗੀ, ਵੱਡੀਆਂ ਮੰਡੀਆਂ 'ਚ ਭੇਜ ਕੇ ਗਾਹਾਂ ਬਾਣੀਆਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪਰਚੀ ਦਿਓ ਜੀ।
ये आपकी 300 कट्टे की ओके ठीक है।
ਤੇ ਇਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਘੱਟ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਟੁੱਟਦੇ ਆ ਜੀ ਰੁਪਈਏ ਤਾਂ ਬਸ ਇੱਕ ਦੇਣਾ ਲੈਣਾ ਆ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਬਰਾਬਰ ਹੋਈ ਜਾਂਦਾਗਾ ਵੀ ਰੋਟੀ ਦਾ ਚੱਲਦਾ ਰਹਿੰਦਾਗਾ ਜਵਾਕਾਂ ਦਾ।
The earnings are enough to pay back loans he took out for the fertilizers, pesticides, and machinery he's used for this harvest. He's left with less than 20% of the profits, and most of that is used as down payment on the seeds of his next crop.
ਇਹ ਜੀ ਹੁਣ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਇੰਨਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਚੱਲਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਕਰਜ਼ਾ ਜ਼ਿਆਦੇ ਆ ਸਾਰਾ ਕਰਜ਼ਾ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਮੂਹਰੇ ਹੋਰ ਕੰਮ ਖੇਤੀ ਛੱਡ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੇ ਜੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ 'ਚ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਹੋਰ ਕੰਮ ਕਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੇ ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਜੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੋਰ ਜਾਈਏ ਕਿੱਧਰ।
Singh's children hardly ever see him these days. To pay for the rest of his family's bills, he has to drive a truck for months at a time after he finishes his harvest.
ਇਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਕਿਸਾਨ ਬਚੂ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਜੀ ਬੱਚੇ ਵੀ ਪਾਲਣੇ ਆ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਕੰਮਾਂ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਾਵਾਂਗੇ।
If monoculture techniques are ruining their finances, it's because they're destroying their farms too. Punjab literally means the land of 5 rivers. But growing rice here is super water intensive and will turn the state into a desert within 25 years, according to government data.
See, in countries like Asia where they've been cultivating rice for so long, it's not because it's easy or whatever. It's because it's like the most reliable thing to grow there, because the mountains are when it rains, it's so mountainous there that when it rains and there's so many trees and green that it just funnels down. So that's why you see those fields of those rice fields where they carved out the mountain to where all the water drop off goes into there. So they don't have to rely so much on the rivers or artificially putting their own water there. Everything is used to that amount of water, and they already saw that the rice is already growing in those fields. So they're just giving it more room to grow. But the soil and the output from water is all already there. They're just making use of it. But when you go to a place like India that's not as mountainous as northern Asia, it's in the southern part and it's not as mountainous, it's not made to grow as much rice. Like you could probably grow rice in certain parts of India and the soil in the river and everything will be fine there. But when you try to make it into a trade and you try to maximize and increase profits and grow as much as you can, at a certain point, like you just overuse everything and then shit dies.
The environmental damage isn't
But you gotta feed the people.
confined to the region either. It's got global impact.
ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਮਜਬੂਰੀ ਮਾਰ ਚਲਾਉਣੀ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਆ ਨਹੀਂ ਫਿਰ ਇਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗਲਦੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਣਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਣੀ ਜੀ ਜੇ ਨਾ ਬੀਜਾਂਗੇ ਜਲਾਵਾਂਗੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਕਰਕੇ ਮਜਬੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਜੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਥੋੜਾ ਬਹੁਤਾ ਸੋਚੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਸਬਸਿਡੀ ਦੇਵੇ ਕੋਈ ਇਹਦਾ ਸੋਲੂਸ਼ਨ ਕੱਢੇ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਰੂਰਤ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਜਲਾਉਣ ਦੀ।
India ranks third in greenhouse gas emissions, and agriculture is its second largest source of the pollution. An estimated 84 million metric tons of stubble are burned on farms around the country each year. And at the end of Punjab's rice harvest, a smog cloud can be seen from outer space. North Indian cities like New Delhi have the worst air quality in the world, in part because of stubble burning.
Unless and until we take the agricultural logic and redefine it within ecology, we are not going to be able to find solutions. Not only is there runaway climate change, not only is it affecting our health, but farmers will not be able to farm tomorrow. No, the resources on the farm are finished.
फिर तो वो सांस लेना सारी रात, वो नाक जुकाम बुरा हाल हो जाता है।
But it doesn't need to be this way. Ravdeep Singh is a farmer who saw the harm in monoculture techniques and joined a movement that's trying to make farming sustainable.
मौसमी हो गई, अपने खजूरा हो गई जी, ते तूत वगैरह खड़े ने, इधर माल्टा है, उधर आमले ਦੇ ਪੇੜ ਹੈਗੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲੇ। ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਜਿੰਨੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਰਵਾਇਤੀ ਫਸਲਾਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ, ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਟ੍ਰੈਡੀਸ਼ਨਲ ਕ੍ਰੌਪ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਮ ਖਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ, ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਫਸਲਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਮਤਲਬ ਸੀਨ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਖਤਮ ਹੋ ਗਈਆਂ।
He does polyculture, which means he grows more than 30 kinds of fruits and 40 crops on this farm all together.
ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਵੀ ਕੈਮੀਕਲ ਖੇਤੀ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਆਮਦਨ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਜੰਗਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ 1 ਏਕੜ ਚੋਂ ਆਰਾਮ ਨਾਲ ਕੱਢ ਲੈਣੇ ਜੀ।
His farm used to look much like his neighbors. He grew rice and wheat for 8 years because that's what he learned at the Punjab Agricultural University.
ਤੇ ਇਦਾਂ ਚੱਲਦੇ ਚੱਲਦੇ 2009 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਾ ਮੇਰੇ ਮਦਰ ਬਿਮਾਰ ਹੋਏ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੈਂਸਰ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਐਂ ਲੱਗਣ ਲੱਗਾ ਵੀ ਯਾਰ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨੂੰ ਹੀ ਕੈਂਸਰ ਹੋਇਆ ਪਿਆਗਾ।
Around the time Singh's mother died, Punjab was being called India's cancer capital, and studies have linked the overuse of pesticides and chemical fertilizers to the disease. Singh ditched them in 2011 when he met Umendra Dutt.
दिक्कत यह है कि आपने एक गलत मॉडल अपनाया है फूड सिक्योरिटी का। भोजन बीमार है, समाज स्वस्थ नहीं होगा, और आपका भोजन इसलिए बीमार है क्योंकि आपकी खेती बीमार है।
Dutt has convinced more than 5,000 farmers to transition to organic since he started the Heritage Farming Mission in 2005.
जो केमिकल खेती वाला भोजन भी है वो हैवीली सब्सिडाइज्ड है, तो समाज को उसमें जो कीमत लगती है खाली पैसे की कीमत नहीं, लॉन्ग टर्म जो फ़ायदा हुआ वो सिर्फ हुआ पेस्टिसाइड बनाने वाले, और नुकसान जो हुआ वो किसान को हुआ और समाज को हुआ और प्रकृति को हुआ, धरती को हुआ।
Guess who makes the pesticides, bro?
Since the protests ended, farm unions are waiting on the government to make good on a promise to expand the wheat and rice price floor subsidies to more crops. They say it'll help farmers diversify to other monocultures. But Dutt says that's a temporary fix because it props up a system that's fundamentally broken.
किसान के लोग संघर्ष कर रहे हैं, हम उनके साथ हैं, लेकिन हम जब साम्राज्यवाद मुर्दाबाद कहते हैं और हमारा किसान खेत में सिंजेंटा के या मोंसेंटो के बीज इस्तेमाल करता है, कंपनियों का ही साम्राज्यवादी कंपनियों के पेस्टिसाइड इस्तेमाल करता है, तो वो साम्राज्यवाद मुर्दाबाद कैसे होगा?
The green revolution also in India didn't happen overnight, and it only happened because a lot of investment was put behind it. And so if that kind of system can actually be put behind natural farming, but you'll see a transformation. Farmers themselves will jump on board to want to do things different.
ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਹੱਲ ਸੁਣੇ, ਸਾਡੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਸੋਚੇ, ਫੇਰ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਦਾਗਾ। ਵੱਡੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਏਸੀ ਵਾਲੇ ਕਮਰਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਤਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ। ਜਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੀ ਪਤਾਗਾ ਕਣਕ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ, ਕਿਵੇਂ ਕਟਾਈ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ, ਕਿੰਨਾ ਕੁ ਕਿਸਾਨ ਡਾਊਨ ਆ, ਕਿੰਨਾ ਕੁ ਨਾ। ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਦੁੱਖ ਪਏ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੀ ਪਤਾਗਾ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਦੁੱਖ ਦੇਖੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੂੰ।
Tragic, bro. So sad.
ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੁੱਖ ਦਾ ਪਤਾ ਵੀ ਕੀ ਹੈ।
My God.
Jasveer Singh's village, Sukhpura, maintained a presence of at least 10 people at the New Delhi protests for more than a year. Harcharan Singh is their union representative.
ਅਸੀਂ ਪਿਛਲੇ 25 ਨਵੰਬਰ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਮੈਂ ਸਿਰਫ 2 ਵਾਰੀ ਘਰ में गया जो पिंड वाले लोग हैं ना उन्होंने सभी बारियां भर लिया एक हफ्ता ला के जाते हैं वो चले जाते हैं दूसरे आ जाते हैं ਇਹ ਸਾਡਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਦੇਸੀ ਜੁਗਾੜ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨਾ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਸਰਦੀ 'ਚ ਹੁਣ ਬਹੁਤ ਔਖੇ ਸੀ ਇਹ ਭਰਾ ਸਾਡਾ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਆਰਾਮ ਨਾਲ ਬਜ਼ੁਰਗ ਤੜਕੇ 1 ਘੰਟੇ 'ਚ ਗਰਮ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਆ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆ ਪਾਣੀ ਤੱਤਾ ਹੋਈ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਗਰਮ ਇਹ ਆ ਤੇ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਆਰਾਮ ਨਾਲ ਪੂਰਾ ਗਰਮ ਪਾਣੀ ਆ ਸਾਰੇ ਨਹਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਆਸੇ ਗਮੰਡੀ ਵੀ ਨਹਾ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਨੇ
Singh says all but 2 households from his village of 3,500 people had sent family members to the protest.
ਜੋ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵਾਲੀ ਖੇਤੀ ਸੀ ਨਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਥੋਂ ਵੀ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਦਾਦੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਪਿਤਾ ਜੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਖੇਤੀ ਸੀ ਸਰੋਂ ਛੋਲੇ ਕਣਕ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ ਉਹਦਾ ਲਾਗਤ ਖਰਚਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਮੌਜ ਕਿਸੇ ਸਿਰ ਕਰਜ਼ਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਮੌਜ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੋਂ ਇਹ ਭੁੱਖ ਮਰੀ ਦਾ ਕਰਕੇ ਕਣਕ ਮੰਗਣ ਲੱਗੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਕੋਲੇ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਕਣਕ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਖਾਦਾਂ ਬਣਾਤੀਆਂ ਡੀਏਪੀ ਖਾਦ ਬਣਾਤੀ ਰਸਾਇਣ ਬਣਾਤੀ ਉਸ ਉਪਜ ਵੱਧਦੀ ਗਈ ਤੇ ਕਿਸਾਨ ਦੀ ਲੁੱਟ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਗਈ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਕਿਸਾਨ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਖੇਤੀ ਦਾ ਧੰਦਾ ਲਾਹੇਵੰਦ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੁਣ ਉੱਥੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ 'ਚ ਮੈਂ ਖੁਦ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਆਇਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਖੇਤੀ ਫੇਲ ਆ ਜੇ ਸਬਸਿਡੀ ਨਾ ਹੋਵੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਵਾਲਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਖੇਤੀ ਫੇਲ ਆ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਵਾਲਾ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਆਪਣੇ ਲਾਗੂ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਇਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਢਾਂਚਾ ਬਦਲਣਾ ਪਊਗਾ ਫਿਰ ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਬਣੂਗੀ
The sad thing is though, if they like push too hard, eventually they'll get outsourced themselves. They'll start, you know, buying more from other countries, buying from China, buying from the US, buying from Europe, and just to not pay their own people. It's the same thing that happens here. We don't want to pay, you know, teleworkers in America because they require too many benefits. They require too much money. So we outsource it to India, China, you know, some other Asian country where we don't have to pay them as much, or maybe down south in Mexico or somewhere in South America. But this is just what happens. Like wherever they can spend the least amount of money is where they'll go if you like push too hard. So you have to find like a good middle ground where, like I was saying in a few other videos, you need to figure out how to make them more money, or else nothing will really change for poor people. So maybe we can figure that out someday.